Yeah, as I was saying, I'm really, really grateful that everybody has shown up to this event. This is one that I was really excited about. I'm extremely lucky to be able to run these events because I get to learn so much. And menopause, perimenopause is one of those subjects that I strongly believe we need a lot more awareness about. I've heard plenty of stories from women who have been through this and experienced some of the negative symptoms, some of them not realizing what it was they were experiencing. And unfortunately, that's had a major effect on not only their work life, but their general life. And so I hope that today we can draw a bit of a spotlight onto this subject and maybe provide some tips for employers and managers to be able to support people going through those symptoms. So I guess an introduction to me, my name's Jamie. I'm the founder of a company called Reachus. The goal of Reachus is to provide mental health support. You kind of think of us as an upgrade to a traditional EAP. So not only do we look at providing access to therapists and counselors, but we also look at the full holistic spectrum of mental health. So providing access to people like personal trainers and nutritionists and very, very excellent specialists like menopause coaches, and our menopause coaches right here, Angela. So I'd like to segue into Angela, if you could do a little bit of an introduction to who you are and what you do, that would be fabulous.
Yes, lovely to be here. Thank you for putting this on, Jamie, and lovely to see so many of you here. So I'm Angela Wilkins Green. My company is called Green Path Coaching, and I'm a menopause and mindset coach. And I started my business 2 years ago last week, actually, because of my experience of moving into perimenopause and what a traumatic experience that was for me at the time, purely because it happened far, far sooner than I ever realized it could happen. I'd never heard of the Help Matters. I thought menopause was something that happened in your 50s, and that you'd get some hot flushes and your periods would stop. And I couldn't have been further from the truth. So I was 42 when my symptoms started, and it took me 2 years to work out what the hell was happening to my body and my mind. And by the time I realized it had got so bad that I completely crashed. I cried every day for 3 months, and I ended up leaving my 25-year career in fashion retail, in product merchandising, which now I'm absolutely happy about. At the time, it was a very traumatic experience, and I had no idea what I was going to do. But I turned to coaching, life coaching. I had lots of coaching, and I trained to become a coach, and decided once I'd passed my first certification that working with women in this space was what I needed to do to make sure that no one else ever has to go through what I did. So that's a bit about me.
Amazing. Thank you so much for agreeing to be here, by the way, because this is not a subject that I could carry by myself. I also have another amazing guest, Louise Griffiths. Louise, could you please do an intro to who you are and what it is you do?
Thank you. Thanks, Jamie. And thanks for having me this afternoon as well. My name's Louise Griffiths. I have an HR background. I've worked in HR nearly 30 years. Similar story to Angela. I was the head of HR in an organisation for many years. I'd got married there, had my children and so on. So I was an established member of the senior management team. And then, similar to Angela, my menopause started nearly 6 years ago. I didn't know what was going on. I was getting debilitating anxiety and panic attacks. I just could not make it work. I had time out of the business. They were very supportive, but we didn't know what it was. Just thought it was one of those things. And after about a year, a friend of mine said to me, "I think I know what this is. I think you're menopausal." And I thought, like Angela, I thought that happened to someone when they're older. By this time, I was 45. I went to the doctor, and the doctor said to me, "You're a bit young to be menopausal. Here's some antidepressants," which I never took. And the anxiety and the panic got worse to the point where I didn't want to leave the house. I just couldn't make it work. And I eventually had to leave my job. And I just thought, what am I going to do? I've got two young children. I've always worked. I loved the job that I had. I just couldn't make it work. So eventually I went back to the same doctor. I went on to HRT 3 years ago this week. April Fool's Day I started, which is a good date to remember. And within 3 months, I felt very much myself again. I took back when I went to my children's sports day 3 months after, and I remember stood in a field and thinking, I don't feel anxious. And I could have flung my arms in the air thinking it's working. But that feeling of just getting myself back on track. So what I've done since is I basically retrained as a coach, and I now talk to organisations, women that are struggling in the workplace, and also delivering workshops and training programs to organisations to spread the word about menopause awareness as well.
Thank you
Thank
so much,
you.
Louise. I mean, it's wonderful to hear that you've turned something which was quite negative in terms of your experience into something really positive. And it's brilliant that you're both here. And I love that you do everything that you do. A few little bit of housekeeping. If everyone, whilst the ladies are talking and we're going through these subjects, could keep their microphone on mute. You've already done it. Thank you so much. If you want to share an experience or ask a question, what I love about this setup is that it's very collaborative, and you all have the option to stick something in the chat or raise your hand or just alert me to the fact that you would like to share something. That is why we've done it in this Zoom room where we are all equals instead of kind of a webinar format where it feels like you're just looking at people talking. So please, 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 if you'd like to share something, just let us know. We can pause and we can talk about that or talk about an experience. What I'd like to talk about first is this lack of awareness. It seems insane to me that this is something that almost all women go through or experience in some form. And yet the amount of awareness we have on it is relatively small. And it feels like a subject that only really is being taken seriously now. So, Angela, would you be able to kind of talk us through why you think that is the case and some of the issues in regards to a lack of awareness?
Yeah, of course. Um, I mean, I think it stems back many, many years of a completely different lifestyle that women were leading, and women were much, much more private about what was happening with themselves, with their health back in the day, and no one would talk about what was happening to them, especially when some of the symptoms that we experience through this time can be, embarrassing to us when we don't talk about these things regularly. And I think over time, maybe even in the last just 5 years or so, probably a lot thanks to Davina, women are starting to say, hang on a second, I'm really suffering here. And we're at least able to confide in our friends, maybe in our mums, maybe in our sisters. And we're just starting to get a bit braver about having the conversation. And now, of course, there are people like Louise and myself who are willing to put ourselves out there and tell our story, which is giving women out there a platform to go, okay, maybe I am okay to talk about this because I'm definitely not on my own. The problem that we have when we don't talk about it, and don't get me wrong, I don't know if you feel the same, Louise, but I feel like all I ever hear about is menopause now. And I think, gosh, people must be sick of hearing about it. People must be sick of hearing me talk about it. But that's just the world I've surrounded myself in. And it
Yeah.
still shocks me every single day how many women I do hear from that haven't had anybody to talk to or didn't feel like they could talk about it or are still being really made to feel like in the workplace that they can't be open about it. And that still is a major, major problem out there. And until we can reach everybody, we have to just keep having these conversations over and over again. And the one thing that I wanted to touch on is women in their 30s, because I feel like this is the major gap that we've got. Women in their 30s are not thinking about menopause for all the right reasons. Most of them are out there having amazing careers and bringing up families and hopefully having a lovely life. The last thing they want to engage in conversation on is the word menopause. But actually, it's women in their 30s that we really need to engage in the conversation, because that's the crucial time when women can start really understanding their bodies, really looking after themselves and setting themselves up for success through those perimenopausal years.
Brilliant. Louise, do you want to add to that subject of lack of awareness?
Yes, and I think it's funny, Angela and I work in very similar worlds, and then she's talking, and I'm like, yes, it is that feeling, isn't it? We absolutely, and I live in that world as well. But I think back to the friend that phoned me. This was a school friend of mine, known me for years, and when she phoned me one day and said, "I think I know what this anxiety is. I think it's menopausal." I was actually sat in this very chair I'm in now, and I thought, well, I can do something about it because what had happened with her is she'd been at work, and somebody had come in and having a chat over lunch, and she said, I just want to share my story. It was the menopause. And she said, she sounds like you. She was talking about how you're anxious at roundabouts, how you're feeling you don't want to leave the house. This person said, look, this has happened to me. I just want to spread the word. And it's that concertina effect. It came to me, I've passed it on. And actually, it took a year from when I first started getting symptoms for someone to say to me, I think this is menopause related. I would never have thought that's what it was. I was 45, but as Angela said, younger women, I don't want them to be fearful of the menopause. So it's going to be awful because actually the experiences we've had, that won't happen to them because the time they do become menopausal, they'll know what's happening. They'll think, oh, that's happening. I'm getting these symptoms. Or people will say, oh, do you think this might be the start? It's almost like we're this generation that's starting to talk about it. But the feeling of feeling isolated, alone, frightened, scared, feeling of being judged, I can resonate with all of that because that happened to me. And I think the more we talk about it and normalize conversations, and people don't need to be fearful or can actually speak up and say, look, this is happening to me. It's a natural part of who we are. It shouldn't be something that we shy away from.
I love that we're talking about these subjects even more. We did an event about neurodiversity, and there's a lot of what you're saying that I can feel, but through my experience with ADHD, no idea, knew nothing about it. Suddenly, I hear people talking about it. I hear their experiences. Suddenly, all the things that I'm struggling with, I'm starting to see in other people, and just that awareness piece makes such a huge difference. Louise, I was wondering if we could touch a little bit more on this issue of misdiagnosis. You said that it was something that you experienced. If we could talk about the prevalence of that, I mean, how often are women becoming or getting misdiagnosed?
I think with me, I use myself as an example, and I don't mind sharing that my symptoms started suddenly. I lost my mum, and it was very sudden, it wasn't expected. And overnight, I was getting this anxiety and panic attacks. So, to start off with, it was very much this is a reaction to some trauma. I've been very distressed. But actually, a menopause nurse said to me afterwards, that would have started your menopause suddenly, the shock of it. So actually, for quite a long time, for a year, I was traveling along this journey of it will get better. I had people say well-meaning comments such as, you might always have this anxiety, but I thought it's not me. And that's the feeling. I didn't feel I was being heard. When I went to the doctor, you're a bit young to be menopausal. Here's some antidepressants, which I didn't take. Someone at work said to me, you can't be menopausal. You're not having hot flushes. I've never had a hot flush. I'm nearly 6 years in. Every single woman has a different menopause, and that's what I didn't know. So this misdiagnosis is, oh, you can't be. I had therapy when my mum died as well. I don't mind sharing that. And the therapist said, oh, you're too young to be menopausal. I look back now and I think, well, what would they have known? But when people are in a sort of level of authority, you think, oh, okay, well, that's just me. And I think it's that misdiagnosis. People will say to me, is this a thing? Am I going mad? Am I an imposter? They very rarely prioritize themselves. It's family, it's children, it's people at work, it's family members. They're not prioritizing themselves. This misdiagnosis can carry on for such a long time because they're thinking, oh, if you imagine the hormones are all over the place, they may feel better the next day and think, oh, it's just one of those things. So, Angela and I sort of talk, when, we have conversations about that importance of sort of tracking the symptoms as well to make sure that actually you're getting a pattern because you are an individual and you'll have your own individual menopause as well.
Okay, Angela, could you add to this? This is misdiagnosis something that you've noticed, either experienced or with some of the women you work with?
Both, yeah. So for me, I suppose it wasn't so much a misdiagnosis for me because I was 2 years in, and it was my mum actually that eventually said, Angela, I think it's perimenopause. Please, she was pleading with me to go to the doctors because I'd been ignoring her. And for me, the reason I knew, but by the time I went to the doctors, is because I did get night sweats. And because my mum had told me about perimenopause and I was able to go and do my own research, I put the two and two together, that it was nights, that the night sweats were probably that. So by the time I got to my GP, she was great, listened to me. And although I came away with the HRT that I wanted when I went in, if I hadn't have done that research and known what I wanted when I went to the appointment, the first thing she offered me was antidepressants. And I was in a position to say, no, thanks, I don't think that's what I need. And she said, fine, let's try the HRT. But then I probably would have come away with antidepressants. And with my clients, I mean, I do a lot of one-to-one consultations with clients, and it's something I hear all the time. It's quite often you're too young, and rather than being given the antidepressants, although I do hear that, what happens mostly is people are just sent away, and or they get given the blood test, which you can have up to around the age of 45, that comes back normal, because don't all blood tests always bloody come back normal? And then they just send you and say, well, there's nothing wrong with you. And so you go away. And one woman that I had in particular, it took her 7 years from being sent away from her doctor to then having a consultation with me. I was the next port of call 7 years later. And so she has struggled all of that time unnecessarily.
Wow. I mean, that says everything. Could we, oh, very quickly, we've had a few power issues in Thailand recently. So if you do see me disappear, it is because a lizard, a snake, or a squirrel has bitten one of the power lines and all of the Wi-Fi in the building has gone down. So if you see me disappear, just crack on.
We'll carry
But
on.
what I want, exactly. What I wanted to touch on was maybe there's a lot of symptoms that we associate with menopause, brain fog, hot flushes, some of the other things that you've mentioned. Are there any more unusual symptoms that women or people trying to support a woman going through menopause could look out for? Louise?
It's interesting. I have currently still got my tree pollen allergy, which is if you hear me coughing a bit, I've had it since the beginning of March, and I get that every year now. I live in the Cotswolds, and it's a bowl of just trees everywhere, which is lovely, but it's constant, and it's this now I'm sort of that's a new thing I've got in the menopause. But I get I mean it's a good one to ask me this question, so I'll give you a list. I get vertigo, tinnitus. Itchy skin. I get eczema on the inside of my arm every other month. That's really odd. It's really uncomfortable. I had started off with plantar fascia as well. I had really uncomfortable walking, and someone said to me that's a buildup of estrogen in the base of your foot. That was one of the first things I had. Thinning hair. The list goes on. And actually, driving anxiety is even a recognized one, and that was really bad for me. So you think of all these different symptoms, but then people go, oh, I get that. I didn't know that was a symptom of the menopause. And actually, if you think about all the receptors of the estrogen in your body, it's everywhere. So, hot flushes is as common as brain fog, the cognitive, but it's the other ones like ligament pain I get as well, and it's just that feeling of just feeling a bit washed up sometimes, and then the next day you could be fine. It's quite frustrating at the time, but now I know what the symptoms are. I'm just kind to myself. So yeah.
Andrew, are there any more that you've either experienced or you've spotted? There's some there that I had absolutely no idea. Plantar fasciitis and tinnitus. Was it Louise?
Yeah.
Um,
Yes.
very surprising to me. Andrew, are there any more that you've noticed?
Yeah, I mean, I really relate to loads of those, Louise. And the allergies is one of the big things that people don't realize. And I spent 3 years going through the hospital through ear, nose, and throat because I thought I was losing my hearing and I was constantly blocked in my left ear. And as soon as I went on HRT, it went away. 3 years of NHS wasted money and time, and me being thinking I was going deaf because I could have just gone on HRT. So that for me is a big one. And then the other one that happens to a lot of women that women do not like to talk about because it's embarrassing to talk about is painful sex, dry vagina, regular UTIs. all it takes is to actually go on some vaginal estrogen, which is a localized estrogen. So it doesn't matter if you're on HRT or not, you can take it very safely. And honestly, for the majority of women, that makes such a difference. So for all the women out there struggling that aren't telling anybody, and it's the first symptom I got and I ignored for 2 years, and I'm like, oh my God, I suffered with that for 2 years and I didn't need to. So yeah, get yourself on some vaginal estrogen if you need to.
We've got a couple of comments. Itchy scalp and skin as a symptom. That's one.
Yeah, the scalp. Oh, it's a bad
Wendy's
one.
also added here brilliantly that there are over 60 recognized symptoms, and the list is growing, which has completely blown my mind because I can't think of anything else that is that diverse in terms of how symptomatic it is. So it must be incredibly confusing, Louise, when you start to experience these things and trying to pinpoint what the cause is must be a nightmare.
Yeah, and it's interesting what Angela said earlier, actually, because when you went to the doctor and were prepared to have that conversation around HRT, that the time I went back and I was put onto HRT, I was, but if I look back now to when I originally spoke to the doctor and was told I was too young, I was so overwhelmed and anxious that actually I couldn't have processed any information in my head anyway. It would have just gone, I wouldn't have understood what was going on. But when I started to look at the symptoms, if you remember, I've never had a hot flush, that put me off. Oh, you can't be, you're not menopausal, and I thought, well, and I was still having my periods. I'm still having periods now. So, people say, are you still having them? Yes, I'm still in the perimenopause. I'm living it. But actually, when you start to look at the recognized symptoms, you think, gosh, I mean, I always feel a bit embarrassed thinking I've got so many. It's like, yes, I've got that as well. But if you imagine that you all go in a supermarket, we'll all come out with a completely different, whatever we've bought. Every single person's different. And that's why it's important to track your own symptoms and actually think this is the symptoms I get. I always say to people that, anxiety, panic attacks will always pass. The hormones are fluctuating. It's understanding that if you're in a very low mood, that will pass. Give it a few minutes or, an hour or so, you will feel differently. And that really helps people acknowledge what's happening. But it's just that feeling of, is this something? Is it not? Am I imagining it? That's the bit where people struggle. Once they get answers, I call it take back control with my clients, take back control of what's happening, but it's getting it to land. I say to my clients, let's draw a line in the sand as to how you're feeling and let's talk about what's happening. And that people feeling they're heard, understood, they don't feel as lonely. And I think that's where really people start to get their confidence back as well.
Maya's dropped in a fantastic question, which is how is it possible to differentiate between perimenopausal anxiety and panic attacks or pre-existing psychiatric anxiety? So I mean, I could ask this question of all of those symptoms, but I guess that's a really big one, and it ties into the mental health piece that we always talk about. So, Andrew, is there a way to differentiate between those two things?
Yeah, I mean, they are very, very different. If your anxiety and even your depression is caused by perimenopause, antidepressants will not do a thing. It is caused by your hormones fluctuating. So they're two very different causes. And so, if you have a history of depression, then you very likely need antidepressants if that's been the chosen and what works for you. But if you suddenly start to feel this way, maybe from your late 30s, early 40s, actually that's when you want to question, well, if this is new for me, what might have caused this? Has there been a traumatic event in your life that might have caused that might mean you need antidepressants? Or if there hasn't been anything obvious to you, and this is where our GPs sometimes are failing us and offering the antidepressant first, if it's your hormones, no amount of antidepressants are going to help. And all you need to try is HRT. And my suggestion would be if you are sort of late 30s onwards and you feel like you need something, then I would suggest trying, if that's what you want to do, the HRT as a first line. See if that's, and also, use the symptom tracker. There's checkers out there. I've got one. I'm sure Louise has got one we can send to you. track your other symptoms. So if you've got other things going on at the same time as this increased anxiety or depression or anything else, it's going to be really obvious that there is something happening with your hormones. And then hopefully the HRT would go some way to help you with that anxiety.
That's great advice. I mean, because that was my first thought when I heard that there were so many symptoms. How do I differentiate this problem with something that could be completely unrelated to perimenopause? Louise, do you want to
I
add to
do
that?
think
Is there
that,
anything
sorry,
else
I
we
just
can?
wanted to
Oh, sorry, Angela. Yeah.
I was just going to add there, I think that's the really important part is understanding that whole bigger picture of your symptoms. It's knowing everything that's going on and tracking them regularly is a really important thing to do. How are they changing over time?
Louise, do you want to add to
And
that? Is there anything else that we could do, or
I
any way
think if
of?
I use myself as an example about the anxiety, I mean, thank goodness it's never come back. And I touch wood as they say that, because actually someone would have to fight me to get my HRT off me. Um, I was the generation, if you like, with Davina Promes. That's really what sent me back to the doctor. I thought, I'm not imagining it. And then there was a shortage of HRT. And I remember going to the pharmacy. I even go to an independent one in town because all the chains had run out of the estrogen, and getting 6 months worth, and almost running to my car thinking I've got this to fight someone to take it off me, and I think that's the thing. It's that feeling of, hormones can be very tricky. 20% of women have severe symptoms. I'm one of that 20%. A lot of people might not actually struggle at all, but I think it's very much about, yourself, tracking your symptoms. And a lot of doctors now will actually say, well, track your symptoms and come back. They'll understand it now. But I think it's very much only you know yourself. And if you're not okay, then listen to that. It's not going to go away, unfortunately. It's about taking control of it and finding out, and also get that support network around you as to say, what do you need?
Brilliant. Can we segue this into the workplace now? Because ultimately, that's the direction that I want to go. I want us to be able to provide managers, employers, and colleagues the opportunity to be able to support women experiencing the symptoms that we've discussed. So first of all, let's talk about some of the problems that this can cause. How does perimenopause, menopause manifest throughout the workforce? How does it affect performance negatively? Louise, I'll let you jump in with this one.
Well, just to start off with, that 10% of women have left the UK workplace because of their menopause, and I'm one of the 10%. And I say to people, if it happened to me, it could happen to anybody, because I would like to think that I, am an intelligent person and I would have worked out what was going on. I didn't. So I think that's the worst case scenario, when people feel they have to leave. Then there's a lot of people masking the symptoms, phoning in sick. Heavy periods is a really common symptom. Women will think, I'm not phoning in sick with that, I'll just say that I've got a headache or something. And I've talked to people who are actually on a final written warning at work, been there for years, because of the level of absence. They're not treating it as menopause, they're treating them as they've got a problem. But you're a problem employee, you're off sick again. And it completely spirals. You have people who have gone part-time. That happened with me. You go part-time, your pensionable earnings go down, the cost of living, you don't have as much money in the house. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. It's affecting relationships. It can affect, with colleagues, perception. I find with women who are particularly senior, I call it a triangle effect. When they're at the top of the triangle, they've got no support network around them. It's about trusting. Who can I talk to that I'm not okay? Brain fog, where people can forget people's names and so on. They've got to do presentations, or they've got to do teaching, whatever it might be. They're really struggling with it. So imagine everyone has different symptoms, and every symptom will have an issue. And it's once people can get that, that help that they actually need, then they turn a corner. But unfortunately, to say 10% of women have left the workplace because of it, because they just can't find a way forwards.
Angela, you want to jump in there? Any other issues or ways that this is manifested in a negative way?
Yeah, I mean, other than what Louise has already said, because I obviously completely agree with everything you've just said there, is the anxiety and the imposter syndrome that's coming up for these women. And this is exactly what happened to me, to be honest. So, I just started a really, really big new role that I was so excited about. And I started it and then instantly was telling myself, I can't do it. I don't know how to do this job. And I've been doing this job for 25 years. I knew what I was doing. But in my brain was giving me all the signals that I didn't know what I was doing and that I was going to get found out and that it was going to be really embarrassing. And I was really feeling it in my chest, the heart palpitations, the worry before starting work. And if you are having to go into your place of work every day feeling like that, suddenly you're going to start to shrink. And so that's what we need managers to be looking out for, is those women that are suddenly going quiet, the ones that are suddenly taking a step back, not talking up in meetings anymore, not sharing their views and their thoughts. And I saw Jill's comment in the chat there, being overlooked for new roles and responsibilities, possibly because she's not showing up in the way she was, and that's what's happening to a lot of women, that they're either being treated the way that Jill has just described in the chat there, which makes you shrink even further because you think people are judging you. So that's a really difficult one that women are coming up against in the workplace.
That's
And
very cool.
I'd agree
Louise,
with that.
yes.
Yeah, and I think for me, when I've done training, is saying to organisations, who's under your radar, who's not okay, and talk to, if you've got people who are off sick more or looking more emotional or more withdrawn. And I think back to myself at work, I remember thinking like going into work every day with a smile on my face, because of course, I wasn't saying I wasn't okay. And I'd have this voice in my head almost shouting, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? I've got to keep going. And actually, I got to a point where I didn't want to, just because COVID happened, it changed how HR was. But actually, I was someone that could stand in front of a group of 300 people and talk. And all of a sudden, I was having a panic attack at the thought of any of that. I mean, it's just my confidence completely dived. Um, and I just think for me, it's that difficult element of how am I going to cope, but being judged was a huge thing. But then I think about a session that I did a while ago, and I said, who's under your radar, going back to that. And I had a follow-up call with the business, and they said somebody, after you said that on the call, was a manager, came forward and said, I'm not okay. And she said she wouldn't have done that unless you'd had this session with us and done the training. She felt that she could actually speak up. So it's very empowering to think that what we're doing, Andrew and I, actually does make a difference to businesses in terms of starting the conversation.
Do you think that kind of nationally there is a lack of support in organizations? I think I know what the answer is going to be, but I'd love to hear you kind of talk about that a little bit, because once we understand what that lack of support is, if there is one, then perhaps we could start addressing what needs to happen next. Angela.
Yeah. So yes is my simple answer, although I do believe there is much more happening. And I do believe there are some big organizations that have a decent budget that are putting things in place, possibly not as much as we might like them to, but are starting to at least have the conversation. Whereas I think small and medium-sized businesses where budget is tight, that's a very easy excuse not to do things. And even this morning, I've had a conversation where we were having a chat, and the lovely woman came back to me and said, "Well, actually, all of my employees are in their 20s and 30s, so we don't need this right now." And in my head, I'm screaming, but it's the women in the 30s that we need to talk to. And of course, I have relayed that information. And I think there's just a lack of understanding of how much work needs to be done to educate in advance, rather than us getting to women when they've already been suffering for 1, 3, 5 years. That's, yes, we need to look after these women, but we also need to prepare women for what's coming. Not every woman is going to struggle through their menopause. I don't want to make it sound like everybody's going to have a horrible time, because that's simply not true. But many of us do struggle and have a horrible time and leave our jobs. So we need to be putting the information out there so that they know what's coming, can be prepared, and also be putting the work in themselves now in their 30s to get their bodies in a really good, healthy place, so that their hormones are in a healthy place before it starts to happen.
Brilliant. Zhusha's had a really good point here, and that is the fact that we are now switching to a more hybrid, more remote style of working. Louise, do you think this has exacerbated the problem and presented us an even bigger obstacle for trying to solve it?
Absolutely. And I've coached somebody a couple of years ago who was having insomnia and heavy periods working from home. Well, it was hybrid actually. And she said that she was really, really struggling with it and would literally, be hiding behind her desk at home struggling. And actually, through the coaching we did, she actually spoke to her line manager. And this person was on a fixed term contract, but she turned around and said, I'm really struggling. And what the line manager did was basically said, right, what can I do to help you? So what she did was adjusting work patterns so she could, if she hadn't slept well, she could log on later. With heavy periods, she could work from home, there's no problem at all, just do it. And actually, subsequently, she got her confidence back and she was made permanent in her role. So it just shows actually hybrid working, if you can get the solutions. But she was very reluctant to talk to her line manager about how her symptoms were. So I think if you're hiding behind a laptop at home, and I use the word hiding because actually you're probably really struggling, but you're looking present for work because you're in front of a laptop. Actually, it's thinking, how is this affecting me at work and what support do I need? But then I've also spoken to managers who've had training, and one said to me ages ago, my team are all female and they're all remote. How do I tell them that I'm here for them? And I said, tell them you've had this training and tell them you've got an open door. And sometimes all that managers need is to actually say, look, I'm always here, just come and talk to me. But it's a business culture. I think that's where it starts. It has to infiltrate into a culture. A lot of people are sort of worried about saying or doing the wrong thing. And actually, it's a conversation with somebody. If they've had a bereavement or they were having stress at work, they would have a conversation about that. And I've got a story I always like to tell. It's a friend of mine, her partner works for a big organization and was given a menopause policy. So literally, here's the policy to all the managers. And he comes home and he says to her, I don't know how to talk to women in their 50s about their periods. And she went, it's not just about that. And it always makes me laugh, if I dare it say, because actually he was so terrified of this document. I thought, why didn't that organization follow up with training, tell managers how to have conversations? Because it's not just about women in their 50s and periods. There's so much more to it than that. So the company almost had best intentions, but to not follow it up with further conversations, it's not going to work.
It's very interesting because in each of these events, there seems to be a theme emerging, which is education, awareness, and providing a culture where people feel safe enough to tell their line manager what they need. That seems to
Yes.
come up again and again and again, whether it's parenting or neurodiversity or whatever the subject is. So it's really interesting to hear it come up again. Jen's put a great comment in here. I think there can sometimes be an assumption that women managers, senior leaders will automatically understand simply because they're women, which is not the case. Angela, is that something that you've experienced before?
Yeah, it's definitely true. It's definitely true that, in fact, there are many, many men out there who are far more empathetic to this conversation than many women. I don't think this is a gender thing at all. If a woman has got to her mid to late 50s and has gone through her menopause and not struggled with any symptoms, 25% of women do not get symptoms. It's going to be very difficult for her to empathize. I've got quite a few aunties, and two of them didn't get a single symptom. They just sailed through it. The period stopped, and they look at me as if to say, what is wrong with you?" They don't get it. So yeah, it's not true. You either are able to empathize with people, whether you've experienced something or not, or you're not, unfortunately. And we need to get the managers out there that are able to empathize, no matter whether they've experienced the thing themselves or not.
Yeah. And interestingly, I had a comment said to me not that long ago, why can't women just get on with it? I sailed through mine and I thought that's not the right attitude. And actually, as a manager, you think you shouldn't be managing people. And my mantra when I was the head of HR was managers should be managing. But I had someone say to me years ago, I don't like managing. It was the only way I could progress. And I thought, well, that's very honest. But actually, it's very true. They're managing because it's given them a seniority in the business and more money or whatever. But they don't like managing. But actually, that's part of your job. So let's get these people that are nervous about conversations and give them the confidence to say, how is it affecting you? and what do we need to do? Because I think you're absolutely right. There are people who are quite dismissive. I sailed through mine. That was said to me in the workplace. I thought, well, I'm not sailing through mine. And you feel this, I'm not interested. And you think he could have helped, to some extent. So it's yeah, and interestingly, where I worked, the company was very supportive of me actually, and most of the directors were all male, and they were very supportive of me. So it's interesting, isn't it, how people may have perceptions, but actually remember that we're all having an individual menopause journey, and we all need everything will be individual for us as well.
Caroline's put a great point. She's put, I've heard that when younger women feel more educated, it's liberating when they can support their mums, which is kind of why I was first interested in learning more about the menopause because my mum went through it. So maybe there's an opportunity here for us to speak to younger generations who aren't necessarily experiencing it, but can learn more to be able to support women in their lives who might be. Angela.
Well, this is the really exciting thing for me. I actually think this is the biggest opportunity that we have as a generation. If all of us women going through it right now in our 40s or our 50s can tell our children about it, I don't have any children, but please tell yours. Um, that is the biggest thing we can do. Don't hide it from them. Share what you're experiencing with them because they will want to support you along the way, but they're also going to learn from you and they're going to learn what might happen to them, how they might be able to deal with it, and also that you are going to help yourself and get yourself through this, show how strong you can be to do that. That is such a wonderful influence. And not just our daughters, our sons as well. Male and female, everybody needs to know about this because every man out there knows a woman that's going through the menopause too. And most men genuinely want to support and help their partners, their family members. They want to do what they can to support. So I have lots of very engaged men in the sessions that I run that ask lots of questions. So
And I think I'd like to add to that as well. That my son's just turned 10, my daughter's about to be 9, and they know all about the menopause. And when my son a couple of years ago, so he'd been about 8 then, and he saw the word menopause and he was into the Beano. And he said, "What's that menace pause?" As in Dennis the Menace. I thought I might copyright that. But it's funny because I talk about it all the time. Or or what's that? Eczema on your arm. Or what's this? Oh, that's the menopause. And my son say everything's the menopause. I thought, well, it is today. But actually, it's really important. And my daughter said, "Oh, what's the menopause?" And she'd been about 7. And I said, "It's when mums can't have babies anymore." I thought, simplest explanation, but they get it. So actually, they will grow up. But I always tell a story of my friend's son. So he's 16 now. So he'd have been about 13. And we were in the kitchen talking about the menopause. And he sat there and I said, "You're right listening to this." He said, "It's just anatomy." And I thought, isn't that great that a teenage boy was interested about what we were talking about? He wasn't fazed by it in the slightest. And I thought they're now learning about it in schools as well. And I think that's really important for children to understand about it, absolutely, to support whoever it is, their mums or their aunties or whoever, and actually grow up in a world where actually it isn't something that people shy away from. It's not just something, going back to that guy, women in their 50s about their periods. It's more than that. And actually, the psychological effects can be really difficult for a lot of people, affecting their mental health and their mood and that feeling. I couldn't leave the house at one point. I thought, that's not me. This awful feeling of you just can't get any answers with it.
I'm really excited to kind of jump into what managers, employers, and colleagues can do to start some really practical things they can do to start helping with this. And I'd like to kick off with Jusha, if that's okay, because Jusha popped in the comments that you guys at Wushu offered a menopause cafe. So could you talk us just a little bit about what you did and how it worked and some of the benefits and some of the things you experienced?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So last year when we were due to review what we were doing in terms of our menopause policy and kind of our part of our annual review and reflection, we were considering, well, like, can we just do something more rather than here's an update to the policy and here's an update to our approach. So we tied it in for the month of menopause awareness and in October. So this is when we launched a cafe and we shared it widely, actually, not just in the separate channel for women, but for the wellness channel that we have at Wushu, and shared it for people that if they wanted to join. We had a small turnout, so it wasn't a big one. It was the first one, and obviously it's quite a sensitive and personal subject for people. But the idea was to provide that safe space for people to be able to have that conversation. And, I chimed in about the remote work because it's a lot harder. Like you can't have those water cooler conversations and let's go make a coffee and have a chat about it. So you almost have to create those opportunities. And that was like that. So it was more about let's have a chat and people really appreciated it and shared their individual journeys and kind of almost gives people reassurance that, well, hang on, I'm not alone going through this, and other people are feeling that. Like I can't relate to it just yet, but I'm learning about that journey. But I can relate when it comes to anxiety because I know anxiety and I know how much it helps when unfortunately, I can say that it helps that I hear about other people's journeys because then you can relate that, hang on, I'm not alone. So what we want to do again is kind of provide these opportunities again. I work in the gaming industry, so obviously we have less women working, but it's I think it's probably even more important to provide that opportunity for people to come together. So definitely something we want to do, not in October, probably earlier. Any opportunity we can get to support people to know that they are not alone in this journey.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. Angela, would you be able to give? Yes, please jump in.
I just was interested in that last point that you just made because I completely agree with you. I hear so often, oh, we don't have enough women to warrant the putting that support in place. We're a male-dominated environment. But I completely agree with your point that actually that's where women might need the help even more because they feel so isolated. And I think getting into those organizations that actually, yeah, might be a small number of women, but they're going to be an important number of women and they're going to feel even more isolated because there's less women for them to relate to and talk to during the day. So I thought that was a really nice point you made. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Louise, would you be able to jump in and talk about some of the practical things that organizations can do to help?
Absolutely. And I think on the back of what was just said as well, I think support groups are absolutely fantastic when they're there. I think, I'm in a local support group and it's not all doom and gloom. We do a lot of laughing. People come out with something, because people get it. You have like-minded conversations and that feeling of being in a circle of trust, if you like, where actually people are opening up about pelvic floor issues, incontinence. But I know people will talk about how they feel, and actually, no one's judging or sniggering. People are actually, yes, or I know about it. It's sharing tips and tools as well. So I think they're absolutely fantastic with support groups. But in terms of practicals, I mean, it depends on your working environment. But for example, there's always the classic example if you're working in an office and you're getting hot flushes, to have a fan, which is always useful for people to have. So that's probably like the most obvious one. But you've got different ones. I mean, there's a really good tip in the ladies' toilets at work. Someone said to me years ago, and I've always passed this on, is a long black cardigan on the back of the ladies' toilet, the door. So if somebody does need to use it, I think it doesn't even need an explanation. So you think, what a great idea. But also putting sanitary products in toilets. And when I go to clients now and I use the facilities while I'm there, I'm so enthused to actually see there's sanitary products there that people can use. But also aspects such as, heavy periods, being able to work from home, insomnia, different working patterns. You remember, everyone has different symptoms, and that will mean everybody will have a different journey that they need. And I think for me, it's to the individual to say, what do you actually need? Think about it and before you approach your employer. But I also think it's that feeling of being accepted as well. With brain fog, is it possible for, if you've got to do a presentation, could you do it with a co-worker? So you're taking the pressure off, or just making sure that people take regular breaks. Or if there's that meeting room that's really stuffy, the one that the aircon doesn't work, but I don't want to go in there. I find that quite difficult. It's just making sure that businesses can actually accommodate. And the Health and Safety at Work Act actually is about reasonable adjustments. So really, they need to be making adjustments for that person as well.
That's great. Angela, do you want to add to that? Any more practical tips and insights for organizations?
Yeah, there were some really good ones in there, Louise. And I think I heard about the black cardigan one a few years ago as well. And I think, actually that isn't just for peri and postmenopausal, perimenopausal women. That's for any woman, that's struggling, with heavy periods. So if that should just be a given these days, shouldn't it? And the amount of trouble I had with heavy periods in my teens and early 20s, I can really relate to that. The thing, I mean, other than the things that Louise has already discussed, the thing that I really stress importance on is giving women the one-to-one time that they need to understand their symptoms in more detail and what they can do to help themselves. And I hear from organizations a lot actually that, is this our responsibility to be helping women with this? Well, actually, I believe it is. There's only so much women can do. And if we can't afford to go private and all we have is 10-minute appointment with our GP, a GP either hasn't been trained, and if they have had any training, there's only so much information they can give us in 10 minutes in that room. And it's highly likely going to be, which HRT am I going to put you on? But if you can't take HRT or you don't want to take HRT, and it is absolutely a choice, you don't have to take HRT if you're struggling with your symptoms, what are your options? And that's where companies can make a huge difference by giving these one-to-one consultations that people like I do, to allow them the time to learn about their symptoms, what's actually happening to their body, and what are my other options. It could just be 60 minutes with one person that makes all the difference to how they show up at work. And I think that's something that isn't being given any thought to out there really, but actually could make the biggest difference overall.
Brilliant.
And I know I've coached people as well who've really struggled, and I've coached people who've said to me, I'm going to have to leave my job, and you can hear the panic in their voice. And actually, with all the people I've coached, I got like a 99.9 track record of people staying in their jobs. And the only person who did leave was a toxic culture at work. She said nothing's going to change. But actually, 9 times out of 10, people can actually find a way forward. And absolutely, it's almost, it shouldn't get to the point where it's crisis. It should be a case of this is what I need. And I think, I'd like to think it's tipped the balance of the 10% of women leaving work to actually that will come right down now, because people will think, actually, I'm important, I have a voice, and this is what I need at work. And it's a reasonable request. This is what's happening. It won't be forever. And also that's remembering that it might be like me, 3 months after I started at HRT, I felt a lot better. I still have days where I'm not okay, and I'm all right with that. I'm open about that. But actually, if people need reasonable adjustments, it might just be 3-6 months, rather than going with someone permanently reducing their hours because of insomnia, which I know someone did. Why don't they just do 6 months on an adjusted working pattern? Look at your menopause policy or absence policies. What does it say about menopause related work? What support is in there for people? Because a lot of people, it's a very private journey. They'll want to see what their business can do before they approach somebody. So it's about being open about how to support. I was going to mention as well about the Labour government's manifesto. They've said any businesses with over 250 staff will have to have menopause action plans. So there's no date as yet as to what's going to happen, but it's not going away. People will still have to sort of start to say, what am I doing to support my staff? So it's a conversation that's, it's gathering momentum.
Brilliant. I love it when I hear that this become a legal legislative thing. Jusha, you've raised your hand. Would you like to jump in here?
Yeah, I think the only thing I wanted to add, and I think it perfectly fits in what you said, Louise, and you mentioned previously, which actually broke my heart when I heard it, that people are on final warnings for absence. I work as head of HR, and I've worked like that for a very long time. I don't like hearing things like that. I never believed in such things when obviously there's a limit and there are situations like that. But I think what I can jump in and advice for any HR professional that try and change your mindset and approach to sickness absence and maybe investigate if there's a pattern of absence for people. We've had this before that we suspected that it probably was a different reason what they put down. So you kind of just try and encourage that conversation and don't just follow the book and take people away. And it's hard, it's just horrible for me to hear, obviously, when
Me
things like this
too.
happen, but I know they do happen.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing. I think it spiraled to the point where she just felt she didn't have a voice anymore. And me as an HR professional, and I still work in HR consultancy, so I'm actively still doing it. And I think for me, it's a shame that I think she'd been there something like 15 years. And I thought, why has it got to the point when no one's actually thought this isn't her and this doesn't sound like her? And it's frustrating. It is, because I think that person by then had just lost the, their energy in terms of, and with myself, I eventually left the workplace. I just couldn't make it work. I exhausted my sick pay. I didn't want to be in that situation. But as Angela said at the end, it's sort of, blessings in a way, because actually what I'm doing now, I'm far reaching lots and lots of different people about my story. And I think you'll get this as an HR professional as well, but I'm actually very private in my HR hat. And I'm like, I can't tell my story. No, I can't do that. And actually there's no stopping me now, because I think no, because actually, it's talking about your story actually gets other people talking as well. So yeah.
And I really appreciate both of your willingness to talk all about the experiences you've had. I think this event has been amazing. I've learned so much. If everybody here could do me a very quick favor and just pop in the chat what you appreciated about this conversation, what you enjoyed, whether you did enjoy it, whether you learned something, that would be absolutely amazing. And whilst you do that, Angela, could you just give us one thing, one takeaway, one really important nugget that you think kind of summarizes this conversation?
Don't be afraid to ask for help. And it doesn't matter if you
Brilliant one.
don't know what it is, just ask for help.
Louise, same question.
Take back control. If you're not okay, draw a line in the sand and take back control.
I love it. And Angela, just to finish off, could you tell everybody where they can find you if they'd like to find you, if they'd like to find out more about you?
Yes, of course. Yes. So best place to find me is on my website. So my business is called Green Path Coaching. So it's greenpathcoaching.com. And I'm very active on LinkedIn on just my name, actually, Angela Wilkins Green. You'll find me on LinkedIn.
Brilliant. And Louise?
Find
Louise,
me
where can
on
we
my
find you?
website. So my website's louisegriffithscoaching.com, and I'm also active on LinkedIn as well under Louise Griffiths.
Fabulous. Well, look, thank you both so much for being brilliant guests to this conversation. And a massive thank you to everybody that joined and everyone that registered that is watching this retrospectively. It's been a subject that I've wanted to talk about for a really long time in more detail. And as I said, I've learned a hell of a lot. So selfishly, thank you so much. But also, I think it's a really great piece for organizations to watch through, even if they weren't here necessarily today. So thank you. Also, thank you to everybody that contributed in the chat. Thank you for everyone that contributed here in the conversation. It was a great event, and thank you very, very, very much for coming. If there's any particular subject that you think there would be benefit from talking about, please let me know, because I'm putting on one of these every single month. And I want to touch on subjects that we need to draw more awareness to and provide insights for organizations. So please let me know. So thank you all.